friends, we are back to read another session of Fantastic Mr. Fox. We're actually almost done with this book. We're on chapter 16, and I only think there's about 2 more chapters or 3 more chapters after this. There's actually only 1 more chapter after this. I just peeked. So hopefully we're able to finish it today. So I hope you buckle up and are ready to see what happens as the conclusion of Fantastic Mr. Fox. Some of you made some really great predictions on who the woman is coming down the stairs. So let's see who it is. Chapter 16, The Woman. Quick, said Mr. Fox, hide. He and Badger and the smallest fox jumped up on the shelf and crouched behind a row of big cider jars. Peering around the jars, they saw a huge woman coming into the cellar. At the foot of the steps, the woman paused, looking to right and left. Then she turned and headed straight for the place where Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox were hiding. She stopped right in front of them. The only thing between her and them was a row of cider jars. She was so close, Mr. Fox could hear the sound of her breathing. Peeping through the crack between 2 bottles, he noticed that she carried a big rolling pin in one hand. There she is. How many will he want this time, Mrs. Bean? The woman shouted. And from the top of the steps, another voice called back, bring up 2 or 3 jars. He drank 4 yesterday, Mrs. Bean. Yes, but he won't want that many today because he's not going to be up there for more than a few hours longer. He says the fox is bound to make a run for it this morning. It can't possibly stay down in that hole another day without food. So the farmers still think that the fox has no food, so they have no clue what's been going on. The woman in the cellar reached out and lifted a jar of cider from the shelf. The jar she took was next but one to the jar behind which Mr. Fox was crouching. Okay, sorry. I lost my place there. Hurry up now with that cider. Yes, ma'am, I'm coming, said the big woman, and she took a second jar from the shelf. Oh, you can see them hiding right there. If she takes one more, she'll see us, thought Mr. Fox. He could feel the smallest fox's body pressed tightly against his own, quivering with excitement. Will 2 be enough, Mrs. Bean, or shall I take 3? My goodness, Mabel, I don't care, so long as you get a move on. Then 2 it is, said the huge woman, speaking to herself now. He drinks too much anyways. Carrying a jar in each hand, and with the rolling pin tucked under one arm, she walked away across the cellar. At the foot of the steps, she paused and looked around, sniffing the air. There's rats down here again, Mrs. Bean. I could smell them. Uh-oh. Then poison them, woman. Catch them. You know where everything is kept. Yes, ma'am, Mabel said. She climbed slowly out of sight up the steps. The door slammed. Quick, said Mr. Fox. Grab a jar each and run for it. Rat stood on his high shelf and shrieked. What did I tell you? You nearly got nabbed, didn't you? You nearly gave the game away. You keep out of here from now on, and I don't want you around. This is my place. You, said Mr. Fox, are going to be caught. Whatever, said Rat. I sit up here and watch her putting the stuff down. She'll never get me. Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox ran across the cellar, clutching a gallon jar each. Goodbye, Rat, they called out as they disappeared through the hole in the wall. Thanks for the lovely cider. Thieves, shrieked Rat. Robbers, bandits, and burglars. Chapter 17, The Great Feast. I'm definitely going to finish this book today. Back in the tunnel, they paused so that Mr. Fox could bring up the hole in the wall. He was humming to himself as he put the bricks back in place. I can still taste the glorious cider, he said. What an impungent fellow that Rat is. He has bad manners, Badger said. All rats have bad manners. I never met a polite rat yet. And he drinks too much, said Mr. Fox, putting the last brick in place. There we are, now, home to feast. They grabbed their jars of cider and off they went. Mr. Fox was in front, the smallest fox came next, and Badger last. Along the tunnel they flew, past the turning that led to Bunce's mighty storehouse, past Bogue's chicken house number 1, and then up the long home stretch towards the place where they knew Mrs. Fox would be waiting. Keep it up, my darling, shouted Mr. Fox. We'll soon be there. Think what's waiting for us at the other end. And just think what we're bringing with us in these jars. That ought to cheer up poor Mrs. Fox. Mr. Fox sang a song as he ran. Home again swiftly I glide, back to my beautiful bride. She's not feel so rotten, as soon as she's gotten some cider inside her inside. Then Badger joined in. Oh, poor Mrs. Badger, he cried, so hungry she nearly died. But she'll not feel so hollow, if only she'll swallow some cider inside her inside. This is them running happily back to see their family. They were still singing as they rounded the final corner and burst in upon the most wonderful and amazing sight any of them had ever seen. The feast was just beginning. A large dining room had been hollowed out in the earth, and in the middle of it, seated around a huge table, were no less than 29 animals. They were Mrs. Fox and the 3 small foxes, Mrs. Badger and 3 small badgers, Mole and Mrs. Mole and 4 small moles, Rabbit and Mrs. Rabbit and 5 small rabbits, Weasel and Mrs. Weasel with 6 small weasels. The table was covered with chicken and ducks and geese and ham and bacon, and everyone was tucking into the lovely food. Ready for this? I'm happy. My darling, cried Mrs. Fox, jumping up and hugging Mr. Fox. We couldn't wait. Please forgive us. Then she hugged the smallest fox of all, and Mrs. Badger hugged Badger, and everyone hugged everyone else. Amid shouts of joy, the great jars of cider were placed upon the table, and Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox sat down with the others. You must remember no one had eaten a thing for several days. They were ravenous, which means they were very hungry. So for a while there was no conversation at all. There was only the sound of crunching and chewing as the animals attacked the succulent food. At last Badger stood up. He raised his glass of cider and called out, "A toast! I want you all to stand and drink a toast to our dear friend who has saved our lives this day, Mr. Fox." To Mr. Fox, they all shouted, standing up and raising their glasses. To Mr. Fox, long may he live. There's Badger closing a toast. Then Mrs. Fox got shyly to her feet and said, "I don't want to make a speech. I just want to say one thing, and it is this. My husband is a fantastic fox." Everyone clapped and cheered. Then Mr. Fox himself stood up. "This delicious meal," he began. Then he stopped. In the silence that followed, he let fly a tremendous belch, which means he burped. There was laughter and more clapping. "This delicious meal, my friends," he went on, "is by courtesy of Monsieur Bogus, Bunce, and Bean." More cheers and laughter. "And I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have." He let fly another colossal burp. "Better out than in," said Badger. So this is Mrs. Fox, and there's Mr. Fox. Belching, burping. "Thank you," said Mr. Fox, grinning hugely. "But now, my friends, let us be serious. Let us think of tomorrow and the next day and the days after that. If we go out, we will be caught, right?" "Right," they shouted. "We will be caught as soon as we get out of the hole," said Badger. "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "But who wants to go out anyway? Let me ask you that. We are all diggers, every one of us. We hate the outside. The outside is full of enemies. We only go out because we have to get food for our families. But now, my friends, we have an entirely new setup. We have a safe tunnel leading to 3 of the finest stores in the world." "We do indeed," said Badger. "I've seen 'em." "And you know what that means," said Mr. Fox. "It means that none of us ever need to go out into the open again." There was a buzz of excitement around the table. "I therefore invite you all," Mr. Fox went on, "to stay here with me forever." "Forever?" they cried. "My goodness, how marvelous!" And Rabbit said to Mrs. Rabbit, "My dear, just think, we're never going to be hurt again in our lives. We will make," said Mr. Fox, "a little underground village with streets and houses on each side, separate houses for badgers and moles and rabbits and weasels and foxes. And every day I will go shopping for all of you. And every day we will eat like kings." The cheering that followed this speech went on for many minutes. So Mr. Fox although he was stealing from these farmers, they were evil and they were hunting animals in this mystical place where animals can talk. But they were harming many of their types of animals, hunting rabbits and foxes and badgers and hurting them all of their lives. So Mr. Fox, what he created in such a panic or in such a terror situation, has now given these animals a safe way of living underground and protecting their families while also being able to eat and be healthy and taken care of. And it is just a feel-good moment because I think Megan said something where she was like, I mean, it's not that bad stealing chicken compared to wanting to hurt somebody. And we had a whole discussion on stealing, but in this mystical world, maybe stealing can be okay for Mr. Fox and his fellow animals. So that was a happy ending for me, but we do have one more chapter to wrap up. Chapter 18, Still Waiting. Outside the fox's hole, Bogus and Bunce and Bean sat beside their tents with their heads in their laps. It was beginning to rain. Water was trickling down the necks of the three men and into their shoes. Pretty lousy situation. He won't stand down there much longer now, Bogus said. The brute must be famished, Bunce said. That's right, Bean said. He'll be making a dash for it any moment. Keep your eyes ready. They sat there by the hole, waiting for the fox to come out. And so far as I know, they are still waiting. And that is the end of the Fantastic Mr. Fox. The author leaves us to think that the farmers are still sitting around that hole today while Mr. Fox is happily enjoying their chicken and cider and geese, all in the safety of his tunnel. So I hope you enjoyed this very silly book. I know that I definitely did. If you enjoy this style of writing and his illustrations, they're mostly usually quick reads. Some of his other books are Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. My favorite book of all time is his book Matilda, and also like James and the Giant Peach. So if you are interested in this author and the way he writes very silly stories, his books are very affordable online, that you could grab a couple of them. This was only $7.99, which isn't too bad compared to some of the chapter books being sold today. But for our next book, we will be continuing the story with our good friend Ivan, and we will be reading The One and Only Bob, which is the sequel to The One and Only Ivan, and I'm just so excited to begin that with you, so we will touch on that on Monday.